Hello and welcome to our midweek conversation of First Baptist Sweetwater, where we strive to be the first responders of God's love. My name is Jerry Hendricks, and this week I have a special guest. This summer, our message text are all beginning coming from the Gospel of Matthew, so I thought I would try to get Matthew to be a part of our first interview. Obviously not the gospel writer Matthew, but our friend Matthew Broyles.
As close as you can get.
Yes, exactly. Today's world, it is, and we're sure glad to have the opportunity to visit you. And so tell us about yourself, man.
Yeah, so my name is Matthew Broyles. I am the pastor for college and young adults at First Baptist in Abilene, and I've been here 5 years now, and I've actually had the privilege of being at First Sweetwater and preaching before, and so it's glad to be back with you all again.
Well, I think that maybe some will remember you, and hopefully, we're in an interim, and maybe you'll come back and fill in a couple more times.
Yeah, let me know.
We'll get things going. But Matthew's a good friend. He's done camp with us before, and so you're not only being willing to be a part of the interview, but you're hosting here. We're in the on third floor of First Baptist Abilene, and so. Thanks for taking time to do this.
Absolutely.
Another reason I thought it would be good for us to talk is I know that y'all in your worship here, y'all follow the same themes, are close to what we're following. And so Sunday we talked about the Great Commission, and you guys emphasized Trinity Sunday and then used the Corinthian passage. Tell me about that.
Really talk about, emphasizing using the Corinthian passage, but really discipleship generally speaking, what that looks like, what it looks like to be sent out, what it looks like to make a disciples, emphasizing like how we live more so than what we believe, in a sense of, making disciples is all about, the way we live our lives, the as you go that so many have heard with the Great Commission passage is, who are we, how are we living, and who are we bringing along with us,
right.
And more so emphasizing that than anything, and what it looks like to do that in the name of the Father, Son, and Spirit,
right. With
Trinity Sunday, and knowing that we do it for God's glory in the name of Jesus with the Spirit's help.
Yeah, and we are in that season post Pentecost where we're trying to dive into text and thought that lead us towards the practice of our faith, and this is one of the first ones that we cover. This portion that focuses on the Great Commission and this last time that Jesus spent time with his disciples and kind of setting the stage for them. One of the things we talked about was how the Great Commission has become really sort of the standard for churches. But how I brought up, I'm much older than you, but how that standard has changed through the decades or generations. Have you seen that play out in your life?
I think so. I know, just from stories and hearing, from guys like you and my dad, and who's a pastor, and so much emphasis used to be just on evangelism and just getting converts, and which is good. Like we need to do that. It seems like the number one word I hear when I talk to ministers, whether it's in my area or senior pastors or even podcasts and things, people use the word discipleship more than anything. And I think it's a loaded word. It's a word that kind of you hear and maybe don't even really know what it means. I know for me, I would get asked, well, what's your discipleship program, all the time? And I'm like, I don't even know what you mean. Like, just like
I think that's a good answer. Now, that doesn't work for a lot of people, but go ahead.
And so it finally realized, hey, I think I'm kind of overcomplicating this. Like, discipleship doesn't have to be this program that we have. It just needs to be something we talk about, that we do together, that, what discipleship is obeying Jesus.
Well, I think the word you use there is one that I think helps us with that definition. As you said, it's something that we do together.
Yeah.
And one of the lessons one of the pastors that I listened to, he referred to the discipleship process in terms of what Jesus' disciples might have experienced as more of an apprenticeship, so that you're participating in life together, and while you're doing that, there's those life lessons that kind of happen
Yeah.
as you're doing love or sharing love with others and sharing different experiences.
Yeah, and conversations happen when you live life together.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid growing up, like, as much as I hated it, it shaped
Right.
me when my dad was like, "Hey, we're going to the hospital, and you're going with me," and
Right.
I'm like, "Ugh, I don't want to go." But
Yeah.
now, like, when I'm in a hospital room, I can navigate that ministerially because I've seen it happen and I've done it because of those kinds of things. And so, what does it look like to take, and you don't have to be a pastor to do this, but take a friend, take a parishioner, take somebody and just say, "Hey, like, I'm gonna go visit so and so, would you like to go with me?" Or, "Hey, I'm going to a football game, you want to come hang out?" And you never know what kinds of conversations will happen when
Well, I think it's seeking those relationships where that there's some intentional things that are probably going to come out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things. It's not unusual for you and I to sit down and talk and have really good conversations, but we'd be hard pressed to sit down and have a conversation and something good not come out of it. Now, others might not agree with that, but I value your friendship and the conversations that we have, and I think that's where it's not an easy practice for people, but I don't want it can't be oversimplified, but then it's not overcomplicated either.
Yeah.
And I think that's where if we really kind of look into this, that's where the church becomes that role for that to be played out.
Yeah.
Because it gives us those opportunities.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this later, is that the difficulty with that idea though is that a lot of times we don't see the activity or the life flow of the church as being a part of that process for us and for our friends.
Yeah. I wonder too, like, we have this idea of we come to church to be fed. I mean, we hear that language a lot of, if somebody leaves a church and, well, I wasn't being fed there. And, a lot of times the question I want to ask is, well, how much feeding were you doing?
Right.
And one of the things that we implemented here this past semester for the first time ever on our Wednesday nights that I think fits really well into just this natural flow of discipleship and how the church can be involved in that is intergenerational groups.
Right.
And so we had college students meeting with senior adults and everything in between, and we're talking about the women in Jesus's lineage, and really good conversations came from that, from the generations, and what does that look like to build those natural relationships in groups together that will, if a college student is experiencing something, they now have a mentor or someone who's older to bounce that off of because they now know them. And so that whole idea of doing it together, doing it naturally rather than just saying, "Oh, we have a mentor program, who wants to sign up?"
Right. Well, and I think that's where we have a hard time understanding when a church is striving to be strategic and trying to understand what it means to make disciples, and then we create these opportunities. If people can really dive into that and start to understand it, then it will start to naturally happen.
Yeah.
But so coming back to the question that we're asked, what do you do for discipleship? That's what you do.
Yeah. And I think reminding people that they're already doing it.
Right.
And just saying, hey, like, it doesn't have to be this program, again, to repeat that. And I try to tell our folks all the time, like, they're involved in different nonprofits around town, like whether it's Big Brothers Big Sisters or United Way or whatever it may be, or maybe they volunteer at the local school. Like that's discipleship. And so how are we reminding people that, hey, like, just you living your life in a way that is salt and light, in the world is a form of, maybe not the only way, but it is a form of discipleship. And just to remind people that they're also doing that, and not to be too worried about whether they're doing it or not.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely, I mean, all those things kind of work together for that to be fleshed out and become reality. And when we're in that, we have that responsibility of facilitating that. I think it does become a challenge because you're having to overcome people's thoughts about what that is.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, I mean, I think it's called the Great Commission for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's something that does give us the opportunity to look into how we can guide this work that we do with people on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely.
In thinking through the process of discipling or seeing those relationships develop, one of the things that I suggested in just a practical point on Sunday was, don't always surround yourself with people that think like you do. And I think when you get to, and I would guess, I don't want to answer for you, but for you and we're going to intentionally gravitate towards some people who we know that we're not going to agree with.
Yeah.
Because that's going to force us to think through what we really believe and how we're going to function in our own discipling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's because I also think in making disciples, we're not making little us's, right?
Right.
I'm not making little Matthews. I'm making little Jesuses. And so, if I'm only meeting with people that are like me, you know, what are we doing?
Right.
And we should. I mean, it's fun to be around people that are like-minded. But in addition to like surrounding ourselves with people that are just like us, I would also include like news outlets and, you know, media and all those sorts of things. Are we paying attention to you know, kind of a full circle information cycle, and not just people, but, you know, information of how are we becoming disciples of Jesus, not the latest, you know, news fad or trend or that sort of thing too, which it's hard to do because it's in our face all the time.
In one fashion or another, and then if you feel like that you're controlling it, then you're talking to someone and then they're spilling, you know, what that's influencing them.
Yeah.
So it's very, very much a part of the kind of world that we're involved in now.
Yeah, and going back to intentionally going towards people that disagree with me, like there's something to this loving the Lord with all your mind. Like I feel like if I only talk to people who agree with me, I'm not learning as much because I kind of have a similar perspective. There's other things I learn about, but when I talk to somebody that's different than me, I'd never leave a conversation without learning something, or even just seeing a different perspective of like, man, I didn't know that existed. I mean, I didn't know that thought process or way of thinking or way of life was there, and I think it just helps us become more well-rounded, better disciples. Right. In the sense of,
well, one of the things that a path that I went down once I started pastoring churches was I wanted my work to reflect conversation more than just convincing people. And I think that in my upbringing and in the different movements that we experienced, you were in a position of convincing people about their faith and where they were and where they ought to be, and then offering that opportunity to be where they needed to be. Where when you look at current culture, current generations, people are willing to talk about spiritual things. Yeah. And most often, if they find out that we're in ministry, we don't even have to bring it up. Right. But we can kill the conversation and the mindset and everything by going into that place where we're bent on convincing them of something, whether it's who's right or who's wrong, or the right path or whatever else. But it does offer us a challenge, I think, and it is one of those things that's has not been stagnant, but the church may have been in a place where we've become a little dormant in the way that we kind of filter in this. It's the Great Commission, you know. Yeah. So we're not going to get away. We don't want to walk away from this, but we definitely have to evaluate how this fleshes out in our context, in our culture. And by that, I'm talking about Abilene versus Sweetwater or any surrounding area. We really are going to have to be better missionaries if we're going to be a part of the Great Commission, I think.
Yeah. I think a big part of that is learning to listen. You know, I think, you know, with switching the emphasis of if I'm convincing you of something, I'm doing a lot of the talking. But if I'm interested in you as a person, I'm going to listen. Yeah. And so I think Jesus did a lot of listening. Mm-hmm. When he walked and as he made disciples, he was listening. And do you want to be made well? Who are you? You know, all those kinds of things. And you know, which one is better, you know,
Right.
I'll just like kind of weird, vague questions, but open ended that lead
Sure.
to conversation and curiosity. You know, I think like. And that's something I've heard recently. It was like, how do we approach people with curiosity rather than condemnation? And,
Oh, that's good.
and so I think when we approach people to convince them, even though it may not be our motivation, there might be a little bit of just a spirit of condemnation there of like,
Sure.
I have this powerful information that now you need to
Yeah.
have, and if you get this information, you can be like me. You know, that kind of thing when we're trying to convince somebody. But when we approach them with curiosity, it's like, hey, let's find this level playing ground. Let's find out about each other. And then once we've earned that respect and that trust, now we can talk about things that are, the spiritual matters of things that actually can influence our lives.
Yeah. Well, so this conversation's been good.
Yeah.
And I know that our folks will look forward to being able to listen in on someone a little bit different than maybe just Teague and I talking all the time. You've challenged us by the things that you shared today, and we appreciate that. Thanks for joining us for this midweek conversation. We always enjoy getting to be a part of your week. And on Sunday, Matthew will be at First Baptist Abilene. Your worship starts at 10:30 a.m.
10:30.
And we'll be in Sweetwater with our worship at 10:30 a.m. So whichever you're nearest, be there on Sunday. I'd encourage you. It'd be great. Matthew, thanks for joining us, and look forward to either having you speak for us again in Sweetwater or sitting down for another conversation.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
All right, thanks. See you Sunday.